Greetings.
Hi, Gary.
Hello, Rosemary and others. First of all, I'd like to welcome Mark Hostler.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I got it. I had terrible trouble with the surnames. But I did have to ask which university it was from Chrissy. So from Florida University, and you have brought how many students this time? 10. So welcome
They all
to
buy
those.
beer?
They all bought, he bought not only beer, he bought a hamburger too, which is where you differ.
It's got animals in it.
Oh, it's got animals in it. Yeah, that's good. The vegetarian quarter over here. For us. Yeah. So, welcome to you all, and I hope you have a lovely time in the People's Republic of Christchurch. And Ovi, who's here, freezing in the back there. So welcome. I think it wouldn't be an overstatement to say that we are very lucky to have probably the finest health administrator in New Zealand in Christchurch, in Canterbury. And I always wondered why he was such a good bloke, and then I saw his mother's death notice, and I noticed he was number 10 of 10 children. So he was used to being beaten up by everybody, which is spoiled? No, God no, the little one gets beaten up. No. You obviously didn't grow up in an Irish family. Anyway, it's David resisted enormous pressure from the previous government to and fought for our resources and fought for what we were fully entitled to as a people in this area, and the pressures that have come on the health system just with the earthquake, but with the recent massacre, and we saw the magnificent way that the whole staff responded in a spectacular manner. Thank you. And David, I don't know, you probably don't have time to listen to the radio, but occasionally I do. And it was really interesting today to hear the Auditor General challenging the cost of capital. So, did you know that?
Yes.
Oh, trouble with people like him, he knows everything. Without further ado, give David a big welcome.
So the bit that Gary left out is from a family with 8 sisters as well.
Fair enough.
Other than the fact of being beaten and challenged,
You were dressed up.
I was a plaything from early on, and I was certainly confused. But certainly knew my place very early on in the piece, and growing up in a household of women. No, I should probably stop there. So what I'm going to do tonight is just go through a bit of the journey, where we're at with health across Canterbury, touch a wee bit on don't believe everything you read in the media, a wee bit about kind of funding, some of the capital builds, a bit about the terrorist attack, and also just touch on the appointment of Crown Monitor, and happy to take any questions at the end of that. I was very conscious of the fact today in the press this most wonderful graphic showing that the Canterbury District Health Board has got to be the most violent place to work. And it's a really good example of media not understanding information and portraying it in a really different way, because actually we have got probably the least amount of harm causing across all district health boards, but we've got a culture that is very much about reporting all of the different elements. And that's something we've been very deliberate about over many years, of encouraging people to be really open and transparent, because the more open and transparent we can be, the more likely it is we're going to be able to fix and to change the environment that people work within. So that remains an important part of what we're doing. But Canterbury Health System is and will remain quite a challenge going forward. Now I'm going to touch on a few of those elements tonight. But just going back to pre-2009, as a district health board, the one thing that people still don't often get is that we're not a district hospital board. We're a health board. So we're responsible for the planning and funding of health services right across the community. So we fund close to 5,000 aged residential care beds. So just about everyone, or 98% of people in aged residential care, the district health board is funding most of, or if not all of the care. About 60% of general practice income and community pharmacy income comes through the district health board. And we also work with about 70 non-government organisations that are also responsible for provision of a lot of care and services with us. And we're also the accidental owner and operator of some large health facilities. So that's the, kind of again the basis that, again, the Canterbury Health System, around about $2 billion a year in funding from multiple different sources. We have about 10,500 direct employees, and there's about another 9,000 people work within the Canterbury Health System that are either fully or partially funded by the District Health Board. So the reason for touching on that is actually the core and essence of the journey that we went on with Canterbury. Because back in pre-2009, there wasn't a concept of a health system. There's a lot of really dedicated professionals, people doing really amazing things, but often in silos and quite fragmented and disjointed. And that ability to push care from one part of a health system to the other, people waiting and queuing for different things, and often a huge amount of disconnect between all of the different parties. But the one thing that you never ever question people that worked in the broader Canterbury system at that time was a sense of commitment and a sense of passion. And one of the things that we set about doing was how to harness that and to refocus how a health system should work. So what we said about was, kind of health actually starts and finishes for most people in their own home, in their environment. And starting to change the focus of actually a health system to one about how do we support people to stay well and healthy in their own environment. Because most people are born, they live in a community, and many also choose or want to die in their own community. And actually as health systems, not that long ago, you would have seen a dirty big hospital sitting in the middle of that. And that's not what health is about. So a core component was really orientating everything back to how do we support people to live well and healthy lives. And part of that is the impact on environment, the places you live, love, work and play is much more important to health than what we often do in health. The other part was getting a connected health system that actually aimed not to waste your time. Now, we've made a lot of inroads on that, may not feel that way all the time, but in fact we've taken millions of hours of waiting by changing the way and improving the systems, and the access to care in Canterbury is unparalleled anywhere in the country. And part of that is we've worked with organised general practice and community care. We've invested in that because that is where your first point of call for most health-related conditions needs to be. And that the purpose and function of hospitals is actually if you need to be in a hospital, you're only there because that's the right place to be. And if not, you should be back home. And how do hospitals support primary and community care to support you to stay well and healthy in your own environment. So that's been a really important part of the journey that we've been on. Then we had a few earthquakes. And this has been part of quite a major part of the journey we've been on. Most of what we had in place in terms of integrated health system was in place before the earthquakes. After the earthquakes, the health system in Canterbury should have imploded, should have stopped, actually we had every reason for services to fall over. Because of the process of integration, we were able to shift and change and reset services within days of the earthquakes. And that is something that actually many people have been, just can't get their head round. And it's the basis, well, it can't have been that bad. No, it was on the basis that if we hadn't had all of this in place, this population would have suffered a huge additional burden. And I'm going to come back onto that in a wee bit, because actually there's a huge additional burden that's already playing out kind of in the community. So this is part of the reason why your health system has been able to continue to operate and function. And interestingly enough, it has not missed a single beat. It has met every single elective or service provision target since the earthquakes, except in the year of the earthquake, where we under-delivered by 100 elective cases and we got penalised by $2 million for that. But we ended up delivering an unprecedented number of acute cases that were involved with trauma as associated with the earthquakes. But also the beginning part of a journey as a community with mental health. And really interesting, there's a recent research paper that has just been published that helps explain that in 2013 and 14 there was a dramatic decline in the physical and mental health and well-being of this community. And so that's about 2 years post-earthquake. Everyone was thinking that things were getting along swimmingly well, and we were seeing this burden of mental health coming at us. And that began quite a difficult relationship with central agencies, who could not understand that actually anything about mental health or a post-disaster context would actually play out in the health and well-being of the community. So we've had, at that point there, men's health deteriorated dramatically in 2013 and 14. Way worse than women's health. Men's health bounced back about 18 months later to pre-earthquake levels. Women's health dropped significantly, but women's health has not got back anywhere close to the level beforehand. And that was before the Kaikoura earthquakes, the floods, the Port Hill fires, and the terrorist attack. Now, I just want you to bear that in mind, because that is part of a challenge that we've got as a community, is that we've got a range of different groups of our community that are still really struggling. The three biggest groups that have been real concerns for us, particularly around mental health and well-being, were those that kids that were in utero, 1, 2 or 3 years of age at the earthquakes. They're now the 9, 10, 11-year-old children at school. And what is playing through there is a whole lot of the behavioural, anxiety, bedwetting, a range of other elements, a really challenging cohort of kids coming through our school system. The other really challenging group were those that were transitioning from primary to secondary school. They're now the 19 to 24-year-olds, and the level of self-harm, anxiety, drug abuse, and suicide in that group is really, really dropping. And that age group are generally related or connected more than any other age group or part of our community with social agencies, whether that be police, justice, corrections, and a whole range of other things. And the other group that has been really challenging and problematic were women who were about 45 to 50 at the time of the earthquakes, and they're now at the late 50s in terms of anxiety and depression. So today in Canterbury, we've got 76,000 people that are on antidepressants. So just to give you a wee bit of a sense of the underlying wellness or unwellness within the community. Just to put into context, that there are 11 suicide call-outs to police every day in Canterbury. It's twice the next highest rate of anywhere in New Zealand. Now the reason for just highlighting that is part of this ongoing journey and sense of either resilience or wellness that we're still continuing to do. And I've got a a graph that I'll show you a bit later on that will actually help give you a bit of an understanding as to why that's, kind of why that's playing out. The other wee bit that's happened post-earthquakes is, and I'm going to go through a few myths. And one of the biggest myths was that everyone fled Christchurch after the earthquakes. And I remember 6 weeks after the February earthquakes, a meeting of some officials that did challenge us to get a head round with a reduction of about $140 million of funding, and began the conversation saying, well, how have you got to that conclusion? Well, your population's gone. So how have you determined our population's gone? Well, we read on the front page of the press 70,000 people have left Christchurch. Now, one of the challenges has been is that actually Christchurch City did drop population. The myth sitting around that, though, is that they didn't leave Canterbury. They shifted to the surrounding areas, so your Waimax, your Selwyns, your Ashburtons. And one of the things is that one of the biggest myths that still persists is that actually our population left. It didn't. Lots of people popped out for a month or two, but they kind of came back. And one of the things that, as a result of that interesting conversation about population, is we commissioned and probably know more about post-disaster environments anywhere in the world, is that if you've got a population that's declining before a natural disaster, the population declines at a far quicker rate post-disaster. So New Orleans would be a good example of that. If a population is growing before a disaster, there's a funny thing happens. It grows at a faster rate. So we've got a population that's 50,000 larger today in the area that we serve as the Canterbury District Health Board than if we had not had an earthquake. So just to put into context is we have been the fastest growing region for the last 4 or 5 years, and Auckland are now just ahead of us as a percentage increase. It is not what people expect. So one of the things is that actually Canterbury today is not the same as Canterbury in 2009. And it is also a population that is a whole lot more diverse. So just to give you a bit of a sense, our Māori population has grown by 31%. What many of you may not know is that we have the 6th largest Māori population in New Zealand. There are more Māori that reside in Canterbury than on the east coast of the North Island. The reason for saying that is we have this sense or view that actually we're monocultural. We've been changing dramatically. And much of our population growth is actually Māori, Pacific and Asian. Part of our population is that is changing the landscape of what we're doing. And one of the things here which I'll point out, this just gives you an example of how the population each year, Stats New Zealand have ended up going back and reforecasting what the population was, because when you have 12,000 odd houses that are demolished and you pick up a community and shift them somewhere else, it's quite hard to track. Now, one of the things that is absolutely remarkable, and I would love to claim this, no, I will claim it, because we've got unsolved deprivation in this country. Deprivation is basically, poverty or those that are less well off than other parts of our community. As a result of the earthquakes, we have become less deprived. Now, when you pick up a population, demolish houses and shift them somewhere else, the very nature of doing that is you've improved their health and well-being. It's got nothing to do with actually the same people, and in many respects, their deprivation is increased because they're having to live in either garages or with lots of other families, having to buy a car that they can't afford because they're no longer in communities that are close to and they're now increasingly dislocated. But it is one of the things that we've done something miraculous. we've solved it. Now, if we ever believe that, we're in terminal decline, but it is the perversity of that's kind of where people get to. And I'm going to touch on is actually how that then has affected kind of our funding, and just give you a wee bit of a sense of just how little shifts play quite a big part in what we do. So as I said before, Canterbury is the second fastest growing Maori population by rate and number. So it's not just playing with kind of playing with percentages. Our non-Maori Pacifica and Asia population is now 78% of our population, so it's changing. And we are the sixth largest nationally, larger than Maori populations in Auckland, Hawke's Bay, Lakes, Kaplan Coast, Tairāwhiti. And the reason for just saying that is they're communities that you would often associate high Maori with. They've got a high Maori percentage, but in terms of physical numbers, Maori make up a big part of our community. Our child population is the fastest growing in New Zealand. So someone's been reasonably productive in the community, but it is a fundamental shift and change from we have always been a older community. The profile is changing markedly. And the rate of children's growth is really quite profound. As I said before, deprivation. We solve deprivation by having a few natural disasters. But one of the things that when you look at other indicators of kind of community services cards, now those are automatically allocated to population, so we can't interfere with that or choose that, but that is based on need and support. And there's something really strange that sits there, is our median proportion of those on community service cards, while below Waikato, counties Manukau and Southern, but we're 10% more than Auckland, Waitemata and Kaplan Coast. So it's one of a number of indicators where you start looking at where deprivation is sitting. We have got a significant amount of deprivation. It's really interesting in terms of our most well-off quintile of our population have got the highest rates of smoking and respiratory conditions. It's a really good example when you shift postal address, we've shifted a whole lot of disease profiles to the most well-off in our community. It does make you wonder about the efficacy of business as usual systems in a post-disaster environment. And that's not having poking the borax at any part. These systems were never designed to deal with it. And I think that's one of our challenges as a country, is how we grapple and get our heads around those sort of issues and challenges. So New Zealand DEP has failed to capture the key elements of deprivation in a post-earthquake forced migration environment. And if I had one hope, that's the one thing that I would hope New Zealand would learn from, because we're going to have another major natural disaster. You just need to look at the Alpine Fault and the clock ticking on that, and that is going to impact heavily on this country at some stage. And I would never want another region of New Zealand to go through the challenges that we've had to battle with. The other bit is you're all better off and more well than the rest of New Zealand. Part of the integrated processes that we've done is you're 20% less likely to turn up to ED, you're 30% less likely to be admitted medically unwell into a hospital in Canterbury than the rest of New Zealand. Now, a lot of people draw the conclusions in Wellington as well, the population is more well. Now, the challenge with that is we've got an acute demand management program that has been run very extensively through primary and community care for a number of years. Last year, they managed 34,000 people in a community setting that anywhere else in New Zealand would have been in hospital. Now, today in Christchurch Hospital, we are beyond physical capacity, and that has been a feature of how we've been working and operating for the last 3.5 years. That's our norm, and part of that has been the balancing of an integrated health system to make sure that we don't cancel or stop or prevent services from being provided. We manage so much complexity in a community setting, It is so different from the rest of the country, and our acute demand management program actually is the largest of any program like that in the world. However, that's not counted through a widget driver of how hospitals are looked at. You look at this through a hospital lens and say, well, actually you haven't got that many people. No, the people that we've got in there are there because they need to be. And just to give you a wee bit of a sense, our average general medical patient averages 89 years of age and has got 5 comorbidities. So they're not in there for one, one issue. And you've got a high threshold to get into hospital. So because actually it's more appropriate that you're managed in your own home or in a community setting, and interesting enough, that's where most people prefer to be. But in that context, knowing they're being treated and managed safely and appropriately. As I said before, you're all healthier and wealthier. And you should be feeling good. But there is some other strange elements. We're managing 17% of all cancer treatment in New Zealand has been provided to the Canterbury population. So just reflect on that for a moment. We have a significant underlying cancer burden. And we haven't quite worked out what the drivers are on that, but it's different. Our treatment regimes and our intervention levels are no different from the rest of the country, and if anything, are slightly lower. After the earthquake, so back in September 2010, we had about 50 people waiting for our cardiac intervention. 6 weeks later, we had over 750 people waiting for a cardiac intervention. In February 2011, there was 1 heart attack and it was fatal. Now what's really interesting is the last 3 years after that, the cardiac burden in Canterbury dropped. You look at it now, it is just starting to go. We'll look back in about 5 years' time and think, where on earth does this cardiac burden come from? And largely it is driven from the long-term stress on the population, the overproduction of cortisol, which is a natural kind of steroid or hormone, I can't quite remember which. Hormone. And that is starting to play through in terms of some of the long-term harm there. Christchurch is the epicentre for broken heart syndrome. And I always used to think that was a kind of a love story, and kind of every so often a woman, largely a woman, fall out of love, broken heart, and there's some consequences. However, we used to see about 1 or 2 cases of broken heart syndrome a year. Post the earthquakes, we were treating over 6 per month. It's really interesting, post the terror attack, we've got another cohort of broken heart syndrome coming, and that's really just an overproduction of adrenaline that causes a symptom similar to a heart attack, but destroys part of the muscles of the heart. It is largely affects females. It's not something that is was very rare, kind of in the male, but it is something that is playing through with us at the moment. The other fallacy is that we've got enough physical capacity. After the earthquakes, we demolished 44 buildings that we used to work and operate within. We removed about 50,000 square metres of space that we used to work and operate on. And today we have fewer hospital beds than what we had pre-earthquakes. We are, without doubt, the most productive health system in the world. Our turnover per bed has gone from 140 patients per bed to 180. Not per day. However, it does feel like that sometimes. But and we really have got a hot bedding scenario just out in place. So, generally speaking, we start a day with whole, up to 100 elective and acute operations happening a day, having no idea where they'll be, which bed they'll go to, because we start with a full, kind of full basis. But if we were just to admit at the average of New Zealand, we would have an extra 180 hospital beds full on any given day if we had the capacity. So just to give you a wee bit of a sense of just why the integrated process that we've gone through is so important. Because actually without that, many of you would not be getting the treatment or care that you would need. And so that's just, again, an example in terms of the dotted line being the national, and the, it is a red line, is actually what Canterbury does, and that's actually a rate, an age standardised rate per 100,000. So basically, it's a way of comparing across multiple different district health boards, and it's not something we make up. This is a World Health Organisation way of categorising. So you can see that we're actually very, very different from the rest of New Zealand. But it's not because you're more well. It's because we've organised the system in a very different way to support you to stay in your own environment, and care being provided in a primary community setting. And if you're in hospital, you're there simply because it's the right place to be. The other wee bit is that care is not that complex in the South Island. And this just breaks New Zealand from Northern, Midland, Central and South Island. And this is really just a complexity indicator. What it continues to highlight is South Island is generally more complex than the North Island. And a core component of that is we tend to have an older population in the South Island compared with the North Island. Yeah, kind of relatively simple stuff. But this is quite innovative and interesting for planners in Wellington, because this is the stuff they need to get your head around, because we're dealing with a different type of complexity. Funding. This is just a reflection from a independent review that was done last year. And I think the component sitting there is CDHP's population-based funding was not adjusted to reflect the change patterns in health services consumption arising from the need to treat a population dealing with the psychosocial impacts of a natural disaster. Now, most of you would know that. It's really, really rare and yet to find anywhere in the world that after a large natural disaster, the health and well-being of the community improves. But yet, that's what we've magically pulled off, in spite of the fact that we have 76,000 people on antidepressants, and the level of mental health burden sitting across this community, which is absolutely unprecedented. So this is the only funding one, and I'm not going to get too contentious on this.
Why not?
Because I won't be. The blue line is the share of population, and the red line is our share of funding. Now, the reason for just showing that is Canterbury has always been about, kind of less than the national average, and that's neither good nor bad. That's just, kind of large district health boards tend to be funded at a lower rate per head of population than smaller district health boards, and that's a sense of size and scale. What has been really interesting, and you'll see the blue line dropping down there, this is the basis of actually the myth that actually the population had left Canterbury, but just accepting that that happened, our relative share of funding followed the historical trends. Where it started disconnecting in 2015 and 16 was the impact of deprivation. Because from the 2013 census, that's where deprivation was determined. And because all of these communities no longer lived in the areas that were designated or highlighted as deprived, we magically got well. And the very nature of that has a subtle little effect on funding. And just to give you a sense is the difference in continuing to keep Canterbury funded historically, kind of lower than the rest of the country where it's always been. The difference there is, just on that factor alone, is about $68 million a year of funding. That's why, and part of the reason we've been in quite a complex conversation and interaction with the centre, is every bit of evidence is suggesting and highlighting something else. And a technical funding mechanism that was never designed to deal with rapidly changing populations is giving a different answer. And that's why, kind of, most of you won't believe it, but I'm only 25. And I've got a whole lot older and growing grumpier than I should ever have been, is because this stuff matters. Because this is the bit that is actually about the core and heart of health services. That is only just one of a number of indicators. Just to give you a sense, this year, our interest, capital charge and depreciation, and just been picked up on there, we'd like to hazard a guess of what that is for us this financial year.
It's 300 million. I heard that figure this morning. Maybe
No.
that's for the whole country.
That's the whole country. We're 132 million.
Oh, wow.
That sits out of our population-based funding of what we're needing to support and deal with. And that's part of the challenges when you have a whole lot of buildings that are knocked over because of a natural event, and you're building a number of other structures. There's a funny thing that happens. And that's a wee bit where interest, capital charge and depreciation is having a big impact on, and what often appears is actually our increasingly large deficit.
Explain the capital charge.
Capital charge is basically interest charged by the Crown on the level of capital. It was 8%, it is currently sitting at 6%.
And
So-
the government borrows at how much?
Hmm?
And the government borrows at how much?
The government borrows at probably about,
Two.
probably less than that.
1 to 1.5.
Yeah, it'd be about 1 to 1.5. But the other bit is actually our insurance proceeds following that has also been charged capital charge. But I said I wasn't going to get Now the other bit is there's a strange element in terms of the recovery, and one of the things that we are seeing a massive impact on our staff and those that work in health. And if I was to look at probably one of the biggest risks that we have is actually the wellness of those that work in health. Now part of the bit here, if I had a stick I'd be able to point at it, is that big line up the top where it's under reconstructional integration. If you look at that line coming back, that's what you'd normally expect to be a recovery kind of line in terms of resilience, optimism, all of those sort of things emerging from that, and strength in the community. What you'll see is actually then the more thick line is just a kind of representation of actually what's been happening in this community, but is also what's reflecting through in our staff. Is you could see a recovery in the 2011 and 12. But I touched on before, in 2014 we had this massive deterioration in the physical and mental well-being on our community. You can see that dropping markedly there. That was also reflective of our staff sitting in there. Started improving, and then what you'll get is then flooding, Kaikoura earthquakes, Port Hill fires, and what you're seeing is every time the community and staff starting to recover and then getting hit with another natural disaster or event, all the way through to you've got the terrorist attack that's going to then hit on the 15th of March. And we had another one that was actually 3 weeks later. A brand new outpatients building blew a water pipe and flooded the whole lot. And we just had to deal with cancelling and rescheduling 15,000 outpatient appointments, most of which were non-deferrable because the type of outpatients we do is really complex treatment because we don't do them in a hospital setting because we don't have the space there anyway. So that has also caused quite a major issue. What you get from that though is actually as a community, every time we look as though we're recovering, a sense of optimism. And you would have had that in the city last year, kind of Christchurch City, beginning part of 2018, was pretty dead and quiet. And then it started getting, first time for many years, a sense of a vibe, a sense of actually a city is starting to come together, that sense of optimism, positivity. And again, another side swipe that has occurred. Now that there, and what you'll see is this bottom line That is the underlying level of resilience. We've got teams now sitting there saying, we no longer want to be resilient. You know, what is not or less well known is in Christchurch Hospital, most clinical services have shifted on average 5 times already over the last year. Now, just to imagine that's you turning up to work, your team that you've worked with for years been deconstructed, shifted somewhere else, reconstructed, and then we start drilling. And the element of, you know, kind of is a funny scenario a few years ago where we had drillers, concrete drills going. I don't know whether any of you have ever heard of concrete drill, but going for about 2 minutes, it does your head in. We had them going from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. Patients and staff had to take their headphones or earplugs out because we stopped drilling every hour for 15 minutes to enable people to have a conversation. We had surgeons in the operating theatres on walkie-talkies to the contractors saying, we need you to stop, we're just entering the brain and just need a bit of peace and quiet. I'm not overstating this. This is how abnormal the environment your health system has and continues to work within. We haven't begun the major building program yet. Christchurch Hospital, we still occupy 8 earthquake-prone and earthquake-damaged facilities. And I want to put the element back onto earthquake damage because everyone seems to be earthquake-prone these days. That anywhere else in Christchurch, they vacated and never went back into. The thing that I sleep most uncomfortably with most nights is that actually with the Alpine fault. But we have clinical teams in our communities that continue to access and work in there. Part of the reason for that is we've been really open and transparent. We've shared all the engineering reports, all those different bits. Why? Because it's really important to do so. But it does remain this ongoing challenge where people think, well, actually, we're a long way past the earthquakes. You must be starting to see the light of the day. We have got years of major building projects to go. Now, that's before I get on to car parking. But at the moment, car parking is and will remain a really interesting challenge. So just very briefly, I'm going to touch on 2 things. One is the one thing the new government, when they came in, they did for the first time take mental health seriously. And we've embarked on the co-design with education, specialist mental health services, police, a whole range of other agencies in designing what's called Manaaki. And that is now included in 2019 schools across Canterbury. Every primary and intermediate school now has access to very complex both mental health and or wellbeing support. And it's really unusual. We had this rolled out and in schools all within 12 months. And today there are over 3,500 children that are having a different outcome than what they would have otherwise done. It's based on no one waiting. If there is a child in need, it is done on the basis that actually it is happening then or within the next day or 2, depending on the different elements. This is part of actually what a wellbeing framework looks and feels like. This is the only way that we're going to really start changing the trajectory and to stop this becoming an intergenerational set of issues for our community. Because quite frankly, if we don't, it's really easy to write the script. We will have and not have enough facilities to continue to fill and deal with the problems across the community. And finally, the terrorist attack. It is one of the most remarkable responses that you'll see anywhere in the world. Just to put into context, the size of the mass shooting, I think, was the 2nd or 3rd largest if you look at outside of Las Vegas and the Norwegian one in terms of a Western country in terms of size and scale. In most mass shootings that would be handled by anywhere between 6 to 7 major trauma units, this was done through one trauma centre called Christchurch Hospital. And what may be less well known is that Christchurch actually is the largest trauma centre in New Zealand. We handle and deal with more trauma than any other centre in New Zealand. Generally, people think Auckland is. The basis of actually dealing with 50 gunshot wounds, and the one thing that certainly soft-nosed bullets do is they're designed to do damage and significant damage to those that are shot. Remarkable that within that context, we had one individual that did not survive. Now, that on any scale is extraordinary. The surgeries that were done with within minutes of the first people turning up at the ED, one of the things is the hospitals don't sit idly by waiting for people to come to them. We had a full emergency department with people that were in there with heart attacks and kind of normal run-of-the-mill things that had people turning up in ED. That was needed to be cleared out and those patients to be safely managed. And also we had all our operating theatres already operating on normal patients, mixture of acutes and electives there, and being able to actually start winding down, stopping operations and closing up. It is remarkable that by 6 o'clock on Friday afternoon, ED was back ready to accept patients. Now, no matter what, and if you just saw a wee bit of the film coverage of that, it is better than a Formula One tyre change. It is just remarkable, and that's a thing called culture. And the clinical leadership sitting around that was nothing short of extraordinary. In terms of the surgical components, number of individuals up to 15 operations, because when you have gunshot wounds, the core component is actually they're quite short, sharp operations to start off with, because they're about stemming blood flow. They're actually about survivability. And that is the kind of the basis, and then you start managing infection before you even start getting on to repair. The response from here is probably not another health facility in the Western world that could have handled and did handle this here. It is just a truly remarkable response. And in between time, there were also 50 post-mortems done within the hospital. All 50 of the deceased were CT scanned. The first time it's been done in New Zealand relative to post-mortems by 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. The elements there, it is just an extraordinary response by extraordinary teams that have just made an incredible difference to both the Muslim community, those who are affected, and the broader families. So that's probably a good place to stop on, but really happy to take any queries or questions or comments.
Questions? Gary? He doesn't need a mic.
Just while you're on that, I was in the hospital the day of the shootings myself, and I was there for 15 days. But I'd just like to vouch for everything you've just said, that the staff, I was shifted from around three wards for my minor thing compared to everybody else, and there were tea ladies pushing those impossible to push beds, they didn't know the steering of them, and people just rolling up the sleeves, nurses working long hours, and a phenomenally professional response, just composure everywhere, people helping each other, patients satisfied, and we were treated as best we could, but obviously there was a hierarchy of need which we all accepted. Everybody who was in there accepted the fact that others were more urgent. So I'd just like to say that thanks to your words, and obviously you're the head of this team, but as a person who was in there, it certainly did happen the way you've described it, so thank you very much.
There is a wee video clip that I think would probably be useful to set around. It's basically the sequence of what occurred through the eyes of a couple of surgeons, a couple of nurses, an orderly and a social worker. And if you want to just be well, the sense of just understating and the, kind of this is kind of what we do every day type of, type of thing. It really is an extraordinary button. That's something that I'll flip through.
I'll send it out with the
It
check.
is
You can find
really
it on the Frank Film
the
website.
Frank Film website, yeah. But it is.
Did you do it?
Yeah.
It is well.
Claims credit for everything.
Self-advertising.
Yeah. Well,
That's the man that.
Well, actually,
That's Frank.
it was a bloody good.
Frank's away.
It was a bloody good kind of thing. But it is a way of just in terms of just making sense of some extraordinary people, and all that gives is a sense of actually the underlying teams that actually sat under there, and the wee bit there in terms of an orderly,
Spence was brilliant.
who's just fascinating in terms of, you hear the surgeons talk about this guy. He hadn't long been working for us. There was a burst artery and there's several other bits, and the surgeon said, I need you to put your finger in that hole and hold it there. Now the very act of that and all the way to theatre saved that individual's life. But that's the sort of thing of just extraordinary people doing things that actually that's not what they turned up to work to do. But just, that's kind of what we do.
Thanks, it's fantastic. Can you just explain to me, has the Ministry of Health and the Minister of Health, they heard the story, and why are they punishing you for all the financial things? I just don't understand it.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking that.
It remains an interesting one in terms of if you want to see what you want to see,
Yeah.
you can make whatever reality. I think what is occurring at the moment is improved dialogue and conversation. We still have a wee way to go in terms of being able to get to a shared view of the of the world. The one thing that we do have is a significant deficit, but what we do know is actually the drivers, the deficit. As I say, kind of 132 million of interest, depreciation, capital charge. And kind of the elements sitting behind that in terms of you start trading off in terms of service delivery versus actually the impacts of a natural disaster. And what we're saying is actually that creates an inequity in terms of that would harm the population by making choices and decisions like that. So what we're doing is working very closely with the ministry at the moment in terms of getting to a shared understanding. And I'd like to say that we're there, but that is going to remain a work in progress. We've got a Minister of Health that actually has heard, and if for no other reason, I think we've got a Minister of Health that actually has the ability to be probably one of the better or best ministers of health this country has seen. He's coming from the right basis. The challenge that he's got is health has got such enormous issues from one end of the country to the other at the moment, and part of that is actually how to deal with that. That's the implications across health generally over a long period of time of quite significant underinvestment, and you get to a point of where you get into a catch-up mode. And one of the things that this district health board has is fewer choices and options than any other district health board, because there isn't another district health board that has actually had a large natural disaster and emergency, a national emergency, that has actually had and continues to work in earthquake-prone and damaged facilities, and that has actually not missed a beat as a consequence of that. So this is going to just remain an ongoing challenge and journey. And where we've got to at this stage, we've continued to work on the basis of outcomes. And the one thing that this system can absolutely demonstrate is outcomes that are non-comparable. And we're going to need to continue to just continue to stand relatively strong relative to that, because we cannot afford to undermine the services provided to the community. So it's just going to be a bit of a challenge.
If you ever need a gang of people to stand us outside, just call us.
We're a strident lot.
Just a quick one. I'm involved in trying to convince government to get better organised for disaster, and it's a slog. But I'm interested in your lessons or your learning. What would you do differently relating to the earthquakes, not the terrorists?
On a slightly cynical but in a darker moment, I probably would have failed spectacularly.
Yeah. Should be rescued.
Because actually we would have been rescued.
Yeah.
Now, on a more rational moment, that would have been absolutely the wrong thing to do for a community. And that's the paradox at times in terms of doing the right thing, is really, really difficult to do. And I've got teams that have weathered the consequences of that choice that made and committed that this community would not be under any more pressure or have to deal with issues because it needed to rely on a health system to deliver and to meet its needs. So there's a paradox there in terms of, do wonder sometimes if we'd failed spectacularly, it would have caused a bit more harm, but we might have been rescued. And that's something that's never sat comfortably with any of us sitting there. The other bit that I do hope that New Zealand does make a learning from is the need for a post-disaster framework. In that, how you deal and provide stability and certainty for systems that have actually been sideswiped. And that's something that actually as a country I don't think we have made great strides in at the moment. And I think that is something that leaves us vulnerable as a country, stepping away from Canterbury, vulnerable as a country to the next major disaster. And to me that's still the biggest learning. If there's one single thing, to have that in place, New Zealand would be in a far better place to be able to respond to the next set of challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've certainly had quite a few of disasters, and we can roll it all out and call it a day, which I think we'll be all very happy about. But I think there's one that's probably looming up soon is the bell curve that we're possibly going to be entering about the asbestos exposure for people in homes, the demolition workers, how that's been considered within Canterbury.
I think with asbestos, it's still a wee bit unknown in terms of what the impact will be. The one thing that has been really prevalent is asbestos has become a word a bit like cancer. And often when people hear the term cancer, it's I'm dying. Now today, a third of cancers are curable, a third of them are treatable and you'll live, and a third are really complex. Asbestos is a wide range of asbestos that actually goes from relatively harmless, and I say that in the context of there's a natural, got a natural level of asbestos in the community, to fireball asbestos, which is actually a lot more nasty and complex. At this particular point, we are seeing no evidence of adverse health outcomes associated with that. Now, that's not to say that we may not see that over a period of time, but as we stand at the moment, there is no evidence that there is any negative health outcomes sitting on that. Now, having said that, you've had a community where we've demolished a truckload of buildings that actually contain variable levels of asbestos. So the ability to sit there and say there's no potential for that would be naive. But again, we're not seeing anything to say we've got an emerging issue at the moment. We would more likely to see that if it wasn't an issue that's probably quite some time into the future before it would play through. So there's a number of things that we're tracking that we're going to continue to be looking for early indicators or signs for things changing. As I touched on before, the level of cancer is a real is a real challenge that we don't fully understand. We do see a cardiac burden that is very strongly embedded back into the earthquakes and the impacts of that. One of the things after the earthquakes, humans are actually like many other animal species. Women start ovulating differently, and they start producing twins, not singles or triplets, but twins. And it's part of a basis of when a population is under threat, it starts reproducing itself. Kind of who knew, but actually there's a whole lot of evidence in places like Italy that have actually had often very similar earthquake sequences that have sitting here, and we often don't learn from international experience. But we've seen some really interesting, interesting oddities like that as well.
Chris.
Thank you, David. Two comments, and you can respond how you like. In your last slide, I'd urge you to add in the allied health people, as I live and are closely related to social workers. I know how active they were post the mosque attacks, and we focus on the acute response.
No, I thought they were up there.
I didn't see them, David.
But actually the Frank Films one has actually got this most beautiful social work component in there.
Thank you. They often get forgotten. The second thing is probably more a message for the people in this room. In October this year we have local body elections. That includes the District Health Board elections. And apologies to any health board members that might be in this room, but I believe that District Health Board needs refreshing. Members didn't change last election, and I think people like David and management need some support from some really good people who can make a difference to health in Christchurch. So urge all you wonderful people to stand for local body elections and the health board, as well as obviously all the other places that are up for grabs.
And I won't ask David to comment on that one. But Aaron, and then people can talk to David afterwards. Aaron.
This is the last comment.
Yeah. David, could you speak to the resilience? You mentioned your teams are tired of trying to bounce back, and they're just getting to the end of their tether, so it's probably reflective of the wider population of Canterbury at the same time. As a team leader of such an important group of people in Canterbury, how are you managing that? How are you doing?
Thank you.
Our level of sick leave across health at the moment, we've gone traditionally, Canterbury has been the lowest level of sick leave of any district health board in the country by a long shot. We're now sitting at the highest level by a country mile. And what's deeply concerning with that is it's not people taking the odd day or two of leave. It is people that are away for 10 days or more, and with really complex kind of health issues. And I think that is part of our challenge, is actually what are the other support mechanisms we're going to need to rethink. Because we've had reviewed our responses and support frameworks, and the really worrisome bit is from a number of international experts, they've described what we're doing as world's best practice. The problem is that it's not getting ahead of the demand we've got. So we've got a different set of challenges of how we continue to support a large workforce that actually has very little ability left to bounce back. And I think after the terror attack, it's one of the things there that there has not been a normal bounce back. And if we'd had a terrorist attack on top of a normal community, quite a different response. The issue we've got is the re-triggering of a lot of the underlying issues out over the last 8 years. And so, in many respects, we're in uncharted territory. And we're in that basis also with the community, as there is not a manuscript or a textbook to follow. There's a number of things that we're going to need to think our way out of, do things differently. But quite what that is, we've got a whole range of different experts, but more importantly, we've engaged with over 5,000 of our staff directly in terms of what different would look like. So we're not coming from the basis of actually having the answers. We're saying, we know we've got an issue, how are we going to solve it? And that's been a really important part of the journey that we've been on, is those that are actually experiencing and dealing with consequences are often also the ones most likely to describe what's going to make, or what would make a difference with them. That, I think, is probably our biggest risk and challenge, going forward is the resilience and wellbeing. And it's interesting, it's just not health, it's actually across many of the agencies in Christchurch at the moment, very, very similar profiles. And I think there's a broader issue for us as a region, how we continue to bounce back. The one thing that would be really tragic as a region is to lose that sense of optimism that was building. And it was a long time coming, but it was starting to emerge and really constructive. This has been a significant sideswipe. It's triggering off a whole number of other issues and challenges. But how we get a community back to that sense of hope, purpose, and actually what a cool place to live in, because that's where we were starting to get to. So that I think is our collective challenge, is what that looks like, and how we continue to walk alongside a community to to help that happen.
I was just thinking on that last question, one of my kids' mates who was a radiographer who had to do the x-rays of the victims of the massacre still can't sleep properly. And that's, we've got that right throughout our system. I think, I think it would go without saying that we've just heard the talk of a magnificent servant leader. And it's not often that you get a leader who's got EQ and IQ. And I just think this guy is a taonga in our society, and we should acknowledge it. Thank you, David. David, I can say that's the longest clap a speaker has ever had. Thank you, everyone. And by the way, in a few weeks' time, the Council is going to be considering the global settlement. We've got a bit of an issue with timing, with an opportunity to have an input into it, and so the Deputy Mayor and one of the executive are coming here. But I'm asking people, I'll be asking in the next newsletter, who wants to help put together the Tuesday Club comments, and each of us are entitled to 5 minutes, so the Tuesday Club might be able to have 40 comments, and we can actually cover everything for the Council. So if people are interested, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you.